We need to give you and donate blood. I would probably die. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Eric, and I'm from the UK. I'm very excited today to share with you the first episode of the English podcast. There'll be lots of new phrases, so listen carefully. After working in Japan for a few years as an English teacher, I've had the wonderful chance to meet and talk to many Japanese people. So today I want to talk about the differences between Japanese and British people and our cultures. But before we begin, please relax, maybe prepare a nice hot cup of tea, and when you're ready, let's discuss. Are Japanese and British people really that similar? As a British English teacher, I've taught hundreds of Japanese students over the years, and there are a few key differences in culture, humour, and society, and these are absolutely fascinating. Now, first of all, let's talk about stereotypes. That is, a fixed image or idea of a person and the country that they come from. For example, British people, they always drink tea. By the way, this is not breakfast tea, this is actually green tea. Japanese people are always eating sushi, those kinds of ideas. These stereotypes usually come from media, online videos, and books, and that kind of stuff. And sometimes there is a bit of truth to these stereotypes, but often they're not that close to reality. But it's always interesting to see how people from other countries see you and your culture. Most Western people see Japanese people as very polite, very welcoming, but also quite shy and reserved. They're not so quick to share their own opinions so openly, and they're usually more of a listener rather than, an active speaker. From my experience, I do think that's kind of true. Japanese people are very patient and good at listening. However, I wouldn't say they're all shy and reserved. When people meet each other for the first time, we need time to get to know each other, right? We introduce ourselves, and we're not going to share our deepest stories and oldest memories, on the first meeting, right? That would be very strange. Instead of saying Japanese people are shy or reserved, I would just say it takes more time for them to open up and, share their feelings and opinions than Westerners. For example, Westerners are more than happy to kind of share their opinions on topics that can be quite controversial, for example, politics and religion. However, Japanese people are much more careful because, of course, they're very aware of the other person and they really don't want to hurt their feelings, which I think is absolutely great. I do think that Japanese people are very polite. It's even in the language, you have keigo or sonkeigo, kenjogo, I can't remember all the different types, but it's baked into the language, this system of politeness. Now, here in the UK, of course, we do use a kind of formal language, but it's not quite so complex as keigo. So, for example, if you're speaking to your boss and you ask them, "Do you want a coffee?" that might be a bit too casual. So instead, a more formal or polite way of saying that would be, "Would you like?" instead of "Do you want?" Right? So there are different ways of speaking depending on the situation and formality. But things like status and hierarchy are not as important in, well, at least British culture. Now, moving on to British stereotypes, when I've talked to my friends and students and I ask them, "What do you think of British people?" or rather, "What is the image that Japanese people have of British people?" And one of the things that I commonly hear are, well, two things. First, gentleman, and secondly, elegant. Maybe the accent sounds quite elegant. Now, first of all, gentleman, I think that's absolute rubbish. I do not think it's true at all. I can't remember the last time I saw a gentleman in the UK. Now, I don't go out that often these days. I'm a bit of a hermit, staying in my room all the time. Also, I'm not sure what a gentleman is. Like, what is the definition or meaning of a gentleman? Is it just someone who's polite? Is it somebody who's well dressed and handsome and polite? Like, what is a gentleman? Because if it's just someone who's polite, for example, ladies first, opening the door for somebody, I think there are quite a lot of people who do that, not just men and not just people in Britain. I think all over the world, there are people like this. British people are polite, but I don't think they're more polite than Japanese people. And when it comes to elegance, I can understand. For example, when we look at the old 90s movies, the original James Bonds, and for example, another great British actor, Audrey Hepburn, absolutely, beautiful. Her acting skill was amazing, and her accent was incredibly British, and she sounded almost like a queen, right? When I look at those figures or people who are a kind of example of Britain, I can understand why they are so attractive. Unfortunately, I think most people do not speak or act like that. Now, people who speak RP and the Queen's English, for example, if you watch the BBC, they tend to speak in RP and use the Queen's English.
A whale off the coast of South Africa has been caught on camera hunting and killing a great white shark in less than 2 minutes.
But in most cases, people walking on the street, your next door neighbor, they probably don't speak quite like that. But that's just my experience. What do you think? Have you been to the UK? And how do British people compare to people from your country? So, just earlier, I said that Japanese and British people are quite similar in their level of politeness. But there is a small difference when it comes to talking to strangers in public. For example, I want you to imagine you are waiting at a bus stop and another person arrives and they start talking to you. Now, in Japan, I don't think this happens very often. That is, strangers just making small talk. However, in the UK, I think it happens surprisingly often, and I noticed this more after I came back from Japan. Now, thinking about it, I guess this isn't really politeness, but this is more about being talkative and sociable. In the UK, it's not strange for strangers, people you don't know, to start a conversation with you. In places like bus stops or cafes, especially when waiting in a line or queue, you're just killing time. You've got nothing else to do. I mean, I guess nowadays many people are, stuck and glued to their phones, so maybe they're just too busy with that. But in many cases, especially a few years ago, many people would just start talking to a complete stranger in the UK. They will usually start the conversation with the classic icebreaker, like, oh, look at the weather, absolutely beautiful, isn't it? Well, actually, thinking about the UK, the weather is rarely that nice, so maybe a different example would have been better. And another way of starting the conversation is actually really positive and nice. They will often compliment something about you. For example, oh, I love your necklace, or your scarf, or your glasses, or something like that. And it's just another icebreaker, but it starts the conversation on a very positive note. Maybe nowadays the custom of small talk is starting to slowly disappear as more people are getting stuck on their smartphones and doom scrolling through Twitter. But back, 10 years ago, when I was how old am I now? I'm 28 now. So when I was like 18 in college, not high school, in the UK we call it college, I had a lot of experiences talking to strangers at bus stops. And I think it was actually quite a pleasant experience. where I got to build more confidence, practice making small talk and building my social skills, which was absolutely wonderful. I don't know about you, but as for me, I'm not good at starting conversations with other people. I'm always worried that I'm going to bother them, or maybe they don't want to talk to me. But when people talk to me and start that conversation, I'm more than happy to reply, make small talk, and just, well, shoot the breeze, as they say. And one more thing that's similar between Japanese and British people is that we try to be punctual. You've got to be on time. But I think the Japanese, at least the public transport system, like trains and buses, they are out of this world. It's not even a contest. British buses are always late. There are always delays, even cancellations. Oh, it's an absolute nightmare. But Japan, on the other hand, oh, it is heaven. Like, there's never any delays. Everything is always on time. And if the train is even like 1 or 2 minutes late, I hear that you can get this like ticket that you can hand into your work to say, hey, the public transport was late. It's not my fault. That just blew my mind. I was like gobsmacked. And speaking of public transport, when people are on the train, I think Japanese people are very quick to give up their seat to an elderly person or, for example, a pregnant woman. But in the UK, I don't think I've seen that happen so often. Now, maybe it's because in Japan you have an aging society, there is a larger number of elderly people, so maybe you see people giving up their seats more often. But in the UK, I think even if there were more elderly people, I don't think things would change that much. I don't think British people would be so quick to give up their seat, or maybe in some cases they don't even notice there's an elderly person nearby who needs to sit down. But in Japan, even elementary school children and middle school children, I've seen them give up their seat to an elderly person. And I thought, wow. But I think Japan's great. I'm very biased though, because I was brought up in the UK. The grass is always greener, that type of thing. So, in a nutshell, British people are quite open and sociable when it comes to public situations, like waiting at a cafe or at a bus stop. They're more happy to talk to strangers. But Japanese people are much quicker and much more aware of people who need help, like the elderly and pregnant women. That's one cultural difference that I have noticed. But of course, this is just my opinion, and it also depends on the individual. What do you think? Now, let's move on to another fascinating topic and cultural difference: luck. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe in luck? In Japan, if you are Japanese, what do you do on New Year's Day? You go to a shrine, right? And when you go to a shrine, what do? You often pull a lottery. Sorry, I don't think lottery is the correct word. It's like that piece of paper that tells you your luck for the year, right? It's a fortune, not a lottery, sorry. See, even English native speakers make mistakes. You pull a fortune, and it might say something like daikichi, right? Which means great fortune or great luck. And the funny thing is, sometimes I hear if people get something bad, I don't know the name for bad luck in Japanese, but if they get a bad fortune, then they just say, oh, it's not a big deal. It's not true. I don't believe in luck. What is this? This is rubbish. But if they get a good fortune, they're like, oh, that's great. Amazing. I'm going to have a great year. I'm so happy right now. So this contradiction or this gap, I think it's hilarious. But here in the UK, we don't have shrines and temples. We have churches for Christianity. But one thing we do share in Britain and Japan is star signs. For example, Leo, Taurus, Pisces, and depending on your star sign, people believe, there is a superstition that, oh, Pisces usually get along with Leo, Taurus are good with Pisces. I think we do have this in the UK and Japan. Another thing we don't talk about or have in the UK is blood type. Now, sorry, I shouldn't say we don't have a blood type. Everyone has a blood type. But if you ask a British person, so what's your blood type? I think actually most people don't know. At least for me, I actually don't know my blood type. So if I get into an accident and I start bleeding out on the floor and somebody needs to call for an ambulance and they ask me, quick, what's your blood type? You know, we need to give you and donate blood. I would probably die. I don't know my blood type. It's not written on my phone. I should probably get one of those like medical cards. But yeah, I would be in trouble. But in Japan, I think most people, maybe everyone, knows their blood type. And they even take it a step further. And they also believe, some people believe that certain blood types have a good relationship or a good kind of compatibility with other blood types. A are good with B are not good with AB or something like that. And that is fascinating to me. So, what do you think? Do you believe in these blood type relationships? Do you believe in star signs and luck? And for the final similarity and difference between Japanese and British people is humility and humor. Some of you might think, Eric, what's the connection between humility and humor? And that's a great question. Let me explain. Japanese people and British people are incredibly humble. It's a part of the culture. But the fascinating thing here is they are both humble, but the way they show the humility is different. One example is where you try to compliment a Japanese or British person. For example, if I say to a Japanese person, すごい。あなたの英語は本当に綺麗で発音も聞きやすいし、語彙もすごいし。And things like that, the Japanese person will often say, いやいやいや、そんなことないんですよ. And they will just, refuse the compliment. And they will often return the compliment and say something like, いやいやいや、何々さんの方がすごいんじゃないですか. And it becomes this kind of like battle where the other person is trying to compliment the other person more. And I find this very funny. On the other hand, British people will often use humor to deny or reject a compliment. They not only say, oh no, don't be silly, that's not true, they will also make fun of themselves. And this kind of humor, where you make a joke about yourself, is called self-deprecating humor. And this kind of humor is so common in British small talk and British comedy. It's everywhere. So here's a tip. If you want to sound more like a British person, get used to making jokes about yourself, making fun of yourself, because it's a great way to create a very light and not so serious atmosphere. For example, one person says, wow, Eric, your memory is great. You can remember so many Japanese words and things like that. That, by the way, that's not true. It's just an example. I might say something like, memory? What's that? Like, I have the memory of a goldfish. And this is another common phrase because goldfish are known to have very short memories. I don't know if that's actually true. I don't know how they test this. But saying, I have a memory of a goldfish is just saying you have a very short memory. For example, I went to the kitchen to make a cup of tea. I looked outside the window and I saw it was a beautiful day. I looked at the sun for like a minute and then I forgot, why am I in the kitchen? Like, what did I want to do? I have a memory of a goldfish. Something like that. Different people will compare themselves to different things and give other interesting examples or jokes, and I think that's the wonderful thing about British culture. Everybody has a different way of making fun of themselves. if you can get used to making fun of yourself and using self-deprecating humor, then you will fit in just fine. You will get along with British people very easily. But anyway, let's end it there. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned a few new things about cultural differences and similarities between the UK, Japan, and its people. And hopefully you learned a few new native phrases. I did try to use a few idioms, but I hope it was helpful. Have a wonderful day, and bye for now. Now, first of all, gentlemen, I think that's absolute rubbish. Like, I do not think it's true at all. Now, I don't go out that often these days. You know, I'm a bit of a hermit, staying in my room all the time. I'm more than happy to reply, make small talk, and just, well, shoot the breeze, as they say. But I think the Japanese, at least the public transport system, like trains and buses, they are out of this world. It's not even a contest. British buses are always late, there are always delays, even cancellations. Oh, it's an absolute nightmare. But Japan, on the other hand, oh, it is heaven. Like, there's never any delays. Minutes late, I hear that you can get this, like, ticket. The public transport was late, it's not my fault. That just blew my mind. I was, like, gobsmacked. But I think Japan's great. I'm very biased though, because I was brought up in the UK. You know, the grass is always greener, that type of thing. And this kind of humor, where you make a joke about yourself, is called self-deprecating humor. I looked at the sun for like a minute, and then I forgot, why am I in the kitchen? Like, what did I want to do? I have a memory of a goldfish. Something like that.